Hi, hello. I'm nice to see you. I have just returned from my second year of university where I am studying English literature. However, I have now taken a full year's worth of introduction to Russian literature, to 19th century Russian literature courses. And I have these books uh, that I've read. These are the Russian books that I read for these courses. And I figured it would be kind of fun to go through these books and to rank them kind of on some very reductive system as to which books I liked the best. Um, because I think a lot of people are very interested in Russian literature and what they should read, and I think some books get overhyped when they kind of suck. And I think other books kind of deserve a little bit more praise that do not get very much hype. So, my least favorite of all of the books that I read in this kind of introduction to Russian literature class comes from an absolute titan of Russian literature, the man himself, Fyodor Dostoevsky, Poor Folk, which just like sucks so much. I could not stand reading this. It's probably I wrote an essay about it. I think I wrote two papers about it, but it's probably my least favorite text that I've read that's been translated from Russian, which is quite funny that it's by Dostoevsky because some of his other novels are quite high up on this list. But effectively, this was written before Dostoevsky was mock executed. He kind of had some ties to some mildly radical groups in I think the 1850s. Don't quote me on that, but then he wrote Poor Folk. He was arrested for his kind of semi-radical ties, and he was subject to a mock execution where they kind of dug graves in front of these people and lined up and were about to shoot them. And then we're like, all right, the Tsar lets you live. And Poor Folk, I don't know if Dostoevsky, when he was mock executed, was just like kind of zapped with writerly talent or something, but it doesn't really shine in Poor Folk, which is a series. It's an epistolary novel, which means that it's written kind of from letters or just documents in general. Um, and it's kind of the tale of these two kind of this one girl who's very poor and down on her luck, and then this older kind of creepy dude who has a little bit more money who sends her letters, but who is himself also not super rich and kind of just tries to just is just creepy. Like that's kind of the whole book. And I mean, I'm not deriding it because it's got a bad premise, but it's just horribly boring. I found it really boring. It's really just a kind of a testament to how sad things can be, but not even sad, just gloomy. It's nothing special, so I'm not going to spend that much time on it. My second least favorite book that we read was this book, called The Boarding School Girl by Nadezhda Kvojins- Kvoshinskaya, I think is how you pronounce the surname. I don't know about the first name. Um, but this book, Kvoshinskaya, very interesting author. She wrote under a male pseudonym for most of her career, but later on, I don't think she ever published under her actual name. Um, but kind of regarded in Russian, very shrewd, very deft. This book is kind of it's just not much. I don't think she's been translated into English like prior to this. Like this might be like the only English edition of her. Um, it's about a girl named Lalenka who is growing up in the provinces and who has I think she's 15. She has a neighbor move in next door, Vertitian, who is has been banished for some sort of kind of anti-imperial or anti-czarist or just kind of controversial writing. And she kind of makes a connection with him from their backyard fence. And he gives her a French edition of Shakespeare. I think he gives her Romeo and Juliet, or maybe something else. But she kind of is, because of this guy, kind of questions her identity in school, and she kind of fails her classes on purpose. and then eventually she leaves home and she becomes an artist. It's kind of like a very kind of typical Bildungsroman, which is like a novel about kind of the development of an adolescent, typically in provinces not via institutions like the university, but kind of via street smarts and stuff like that, and kind of developing. Kunstlerroman is a novel about the development of an artist, so I suppose you could almost say that this leans into that a little bit more. It definitely has characteristics of both, but I just didn't find it that good. I don't think the translation is particularly fresh. I think it's a bit of a stale translation. I think that it's a very short book. Yeah, I just don't think there's anything special about it, to be honest. It doesn't, I mean, compared to some of the other books on this list, which are borderline life changers, this one is, something that I had to read for class, and it doesn't really go beyond that. And after that, I have perhaps one of the more controversial items on this list, because it was my third least favorite. I didn't really like it at all, which is Yevgeny Onegin by Pushkin, who, if you don't know who Pushkin is, he is effectively the Shakespeare of Russian letters. He was writing in the early 19th century, massively revered, massively influential. You can't understate it. And this is kind of his big romantic work, romantic with a capital R, which is about superfluous men, kind of these guys who lounge around and don't really do anything and are very dissatisfied with society nonetheless. And it's written in verse. It's a novel written in verse, so it's poetry. And the rhyme scheme is kind of fun. It's got like the Pushkin stanza or whatever. I'm not sure what it is. It's very intricate. But overall, just not that inspiring, not that thrilling to read, not that exciting. Nonetheless, a very important text in Russian literature that I think you should read, just because of kind of how reverential because of what a reverential air kind of it has in Russian letters. But overall, not a very good reading experience. Now, that said, I would like somebody to try out Nabokov's translation, Nabokov, because I think I'm reading Pale Fire, his novel right now, and he did one, but of course it's prolix, it's kind of highfalutin, so maybe that will, it's not just fit, I suppose, for an introductory class, but maybe I'll get around to that and I'll enjoy it more. Then my fourth pick, which I didn't mind, so we're transitioning here into kind of novels that I'm a bit impartial about, is, if I can find it, Leo Tolstoy. Perhaps you'll see him later. Childhood, Boyhood, and Youth, which is effectively sort of a chronicling of his life, but you really get that kind of Tolstoy air about it. It was also written in the 1850s, I think. It's got a photo of a young Tolstoy looking very dashing on the cover. It's a trilogy, apparently, that he began in his early 20s. Here I am reading just off the back of the book. But I really enjoyed it. Tolstoy's prose even translated into English, though this isn't translated by Peter and Volhensky. It's translated by someone named Judson Rosegrant. I still found it that Tolstoy's kind of voice, I felt that I recognized it a little bit in Anna Karenina. And yeah, it was enjoyable. I have nothing bad to say about it. It wasn't quite as sprawling and inspiring as some of the other works on this list, but good nonetheless, and something that I think people should consider if they're in the mood to read more Tolstoy, especially after finishing maybe one of his longer works. So after Tolstoy, we arrive at perhaps not the most popular, but a very popular writer, very culturally known writer, which is Gogol. And we read a number of his short stories. We read The Diary of a Madman, we read The Nose, and we read The Overcoat. And I enjoyed all of them, to be honest. I wrote an essay about Diary of a Madman, where I essentially said that Gogol sort of, I used this strange Kantian framework from another class that I said in the footnote, and talked about how he kind of eschews all objectivity in life through the frame story or something like that, something ridiculous, but I did pretty well. And I really enjoyed reading them because they're crazy. Like, this is what you imagine the kind of Russian literature is like, according to like the brooding, nervous caricature that it has in our cultural groupthink. Um, so I like this one quite a lot. I would recommend Gogol to anyone who wants to read him. Interesting fact about Gogol is that when he put out his other work, I don't know if it's a novel or a short story or what it is, but Dead Souls, a very popular critic of the day, Belinsky, I don't know his first name, derided Gogol for his representation of the Russian peasantry. Because this was, I think, before, I suppose it was probably after the emancipation of the Russian serfs. But effectively, Gogol was like, yeah, we don't really need to teach him to read. I'm paraphrasing here, but kind of an interesting guy who had some interesting takes on different things. After Diary of a Madman, Gogol, I move on to a novel that I really, really liked, and which I posted about on Instagram, which is Mikhail Lermontov's A Hero of Our Time, which a lot of people talk about, and which I thought was just brilliant. Really just brilliant. It's about this guy, Pechorin, who's kind of a brooding, superfluous man, but who's just like a very dark character, kind of a proto-nihilist in a way, it felt to me, who talks about, he just, he goes around, he messes with women, he makes them fall in love with him, he leaves, he gets into duels, he kills people. It's just, he's kind of an proto-existentialist in a way. Yeah, just a fantastic, very lithe novel. You could read it like almost in an afternoon. Yeah, really, really pleasurable. I have nothing else to say about it aside from good work. Lermontov's voice, I suppose I do have something else to say about it. Lermontov's voice, like I read it over a year ago now, so I can't tell you if the prose was particularly exciting. But it wasn't, I didn't find it very difficult to read at all. I think anybody could get through it. So yeah, I would give this one a shot if you're interested in that kind of darkness and all that exciting stuff. And moving a little bit away from that dark theme, an underdog that I didn't think I was going to like that much, but that I actually came to love, is Karolina Pavlova's The Only Woman on this list. The only woman we read... No, we had Kushinskaya, but A Double Life, which is a fantastic book, written half in prose, half in verse. Maybe not quite half and half, but there's a lot of verse. And it's about a young woman who's kind of doing the aristocratic courting process, and who's kind of has these weird dreams about the romantic with the capital R, where the spirit kind of tries to entice her to go into this other path of life. And just a very, very beautifully written book, a book with a lot of nuance to it, which I really enjoyed. The poetry is really, really good for translated poetry, like startlingly good. So I would recommend this one absolutely. Another very thin one as well, and kind of in the annals of Russian letters, there seems to be a lot of massive impedimenta. So I would go with this one if you want a nice little introduction. And moving from A Double Life, we get to my two favorite books. The first of which, my two favorite books that I read in my 19th century Russian literature courses. The first of which is Dostoevsky's. My second favorite is Crime and Punishment, which I've read twice now. I read it for the first time. I read this edition, if I can find it. I read this edition, which is the Constance Garnett Dover Thrift Edition, in May of 2021. I bought it when I was like 15 online on eBay because I heard about Dostoevsky and he sounds like this dark and interesting character. So I read Crime and Punishment for the first time. I got around to it in May 2021. I didn't love it. I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads because I felt like I had to, I guess. But it didn't really stick out to me as a particularly good novel. Mind you, I was reading the Constance Garnett translation, which is not fantastic, and which my professor really derided, so I wouldn't go for the Constance Garnett translation if you have the option not to read it. However, reading the Constance Garnett translation is better than not reading the book at all, of course. But then, for this class, I read it again. I wasn't sure if I should even read it again, but I decided to. which was no easy feat because it's almost 500 pages. But this is the Pevear and Volokhonsky edition, which is kind of the most respected and recent translation. Not most recent, but most respected recent translation. And I enjoyed it a lot more. I honestly, this is kind of, I don't know how this really makes it. I can't tell you exactly why this is my number 2 favorite pick, but I think it's never what I'm expecting it to be. I think that's probably the best way to put it. I love it. I love its... I contain definitely multitudes about it, but it's a good novel. It ends with a conversion scene that's quite polarizing. It has an epilogue that's quite polarizing. I guess that's not really a spoiler. And I just, like, every time I finish it, I actually I've lowered the rating for it twice. I lowered it to 4 stars, and then after I finish it for the second time, I lowered it to 3 stars. So technically it has a double life. I kind of have enjoyed it a lot more than Crime and Punishment, but this book is the one that has lingered a lot more than the other ones, which I kind of, to me, is kind of the hallmark of a great book that I've read, is when it kind of sticks around with you and you think about it for a while and it really gets inside of your head, which it definitely does. I wrote a paper about it, about kind of the mechanical action in the book. There's a lot of Raskolnikov took out the axe mechanically, and he shut the door mechanically. And that was something interesting we talked about in class, so I kind of looked at it as this sort of mode of acting in faith, kind of tied it into some of the free will discussion that's present in the novel. So, very, very interesting book. Lots of themes. Dostoevsky, kind of famed for writing these novels of dialogue, where there's all these different opinions represented in different characters. And that even if Dostoevsky himself has a particular take on things, that the opinions of these characters are in there anyway. So you can get a lot out of Crime and Punishment. So for that reason, and I mean, it's Crime and Punishment. It's a classic. It's Dostoevsky at his best, at his post-mock execution. So I would absolutely, I'd recommend it. I mean, you have to read it. You don't really have a choice. And my absolute favorite, here we go, number 1, drum roll, which I read probably about a month ago. Absolutely the best book I've read this year. Didn't expect to like it and relate too much to it as much as I did. Anna Karenina by Tolstoy. I fell in love both with the book and also just with Tolstoy while I was reading about Tolstoy, about his life. Such an interesting character. Ties, later in life he became kind of this vehement pacifist who had these schools established after him all over the globe, where Gandhi was actually sort of caught up. So massive kind of historical repercussions from this guy. And this is just like the greatest novel, probably one of the greatest novels I've ever read. It took some adjusting to get used to the prose, because it's very simple. Tolstoy, that's kind of characteristic of his style, is that he just writes, he does what he can to get the point across. And there's no pyrotechnics, there's no flourishings, which is really nice. I think it's just, the storyline is gorgeous. Levin is absolutely my favorite character. I honestly didn't care much for Anna. Reading for pleasure, I didn't care much for Anna and Vronsky's affair. I cared the most about Levin. I mean, of course, Anna and Vronsky are also just live in my mind now. But I just thought this was magnificent. You can even see on my copy just how much I really tore it up while I was reading it, and it's littered with annotations now, which you can't see on the camera, but it's just fantastic. It also ends with a conversion scene, but it's a very different type of conversion scene than Crime and Punishment. It ends on a lot happier of a note. Well, I mean, Crime and Punishment also doesn't have a horrible ending, but just the ending to this novel I think is fantastic. I think that the ending, I won't spoil anything, but I think the ending to Anna and Vronsky's arc is fantastic. One of the themes that I wrote about a little bit in the book was I wrote about Anna's kind of novel interest. She has a lot of interest, if you read the book very closely, in English novels. When I think it's Dolly goes to visit her in Vronsky, she remarks that the place is like a villa out of an English novel. She reads books a lot, especially leading up to kind of the novel's climax. She reads a lot. So I kind of wrote about, it's a very interesting kind of, almost, it gets a little bit metatextual in that way, which is cool, which is really cool. And Tolstoy himself, really cool. So this summer, because of Anna Karenina, I'm planning on reading War and Peace, which I'm very excited about. And which I know is not as kind of revered as a novel as Anna Karenina, but I want to get more Tolstoy. I want to read his other works. I want to read The Death of Ivan Ilyich, I think it's called. I want to read The Kingdom of God is Within You. I want to read just all of this stuff. I find him really interesting. And I want to read just scholarly stuff about Tolstoy too. So if I was going to recommend any of the books on this list, it would be Anna Karenina, Anna Karenina, Anna Karenina, just as William Faulkner recommended Anna Karenina 3 times out of the 3 books that he could choose for young writers. It's a perfect novel in my opinion. It's just sublime. And trumps by far all of the other novels that I read. So I'm very grateful to have kind of been forced to read it, especially in a short time span, by that course, by school. However, I think that if you read it over a long period of time, it would also be fantastic because the characters, the kind of this atmosphere of it all really gets into you. The themes, Tolstoy's writing, it's beautiful, it really gets there. And I would recommend, if you can, while reading it, to try to get some supplementary materials too. I think that the lectures really helped me appreciate some of the more ambiguous or contentious aspects of it, narrative-wise, like Levin's 100-page long rant on agriculture and stuff like that. But yeah, absolutely Anna Karenina all the way. But overall, I mean, I loved reading even the books that I didn't like reading. I still liked reading them. I liked to, thinking about them, thinking about why I didn't like them. It's kind of unprofessional, I know, to take all these books that I had to read in kind of a scholarly setting and be like, oh, this one I didn't like I didn't really vibe with the themes of this book, personally, but I thought it would be fun. I thought people might be curious as to what we read in this Russian class, which was phenomenal. So if you ever get the chance to study any Russian literature, I would recommend it. I recommend just reading it personally. It's not very hard to read at all. I think it's quite accessible, especially Anna Karenina, very accessible. Even Crime and Punishment, quite accessible if you get a good translation. That's the big thing. I think a book can really be ruined by the translation, especially Constance Garnett. The experience isn't just, it's not totally gone. You can still get a lot out of it, but I think you definitely could be put off of Russian literature if you read a bad translation of something and you struggle through it. So get a good translation, get Anna Karenina, read lots of Russian literature. So I guess that's all that I have to say about that. I'll probably make some more videos. I want to make another video about I think it would be funny to make a Lit Bro video about some of my favorite books that fall under the Lit Bro subgenre. But for now, that's all that I have to say about Russian literature. So thank you very much for watching. I will see you all next time if I make another video. Okay, bye-bye.